Recording now. Welcome everybody to the Smitty Story Hour. We'll begin in just a moment. If you haven't heard, I've said it once before, I'll keep saying it. Please, oh, very please, put your name, your class year, and your location in the chat. We just like to know where people are joining us from. Also, if you have any questions throughout the night, put it in that same chat feature. I can't promise we'll get to all the questions, but we'll do our best, and anything that needs a follow-up, we'll get back to you. The Smitty Story Hour is being recorded. It will be available on our website and YouTube channel for future viewing. And as with all of our Smitty Story Hours that we've had in the last year, this is brought to you by the Paul Smith College Alumni Association. And with that, I would like to say, Dr. Recklin, where'd you go? Oh, there you are.
I'm right here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. I'm going to mute. I would ask all other panelists to mute until it's your turn. And with that,
all right,
we're off.
Well, thanks, Heather. I'm just going to set the stage here for the evening's activities. And I'm Mike Recklin, Termy Forester, pre-pro Forester, class of 66. And I know there are some of my classmates on this, and that's really, really nice to see. There are many legends and many ghosts that stalk the halls of Paul Smith College. And each of us as students were part of and were shaped by a really unique experience at Paul Smith. It's an experience that can never be repeated. And some might say that is a good thing, okay? But it certainly is an experience that should never be forgotten. This Keep the Legends Alive program is just the first. As we look back at Professor Gould Jennings, Stumpy Hoyt. Hoyt was a larger-than-life character who continues to this day to exert an influence on the education offered by Paul Smith College. Here's how the evening is going to run. Paul's going to come on first, give his name, rank, serial number, and talk a little bit about where Gould Jennings came from and what made him what he was. We're then going to come into a series of Stumpy stories. Karen, Kathy, myself, tell you stories about how things were when we were there, our unique period. Brett's going to come on then and talk a little bit about how the Hoyt legacy continues in the classroom today. I know we've all got Hoyt stories, and we're going to hear a couple tonight, but there are many, many good stories out there. And before we're done, we'll invite you to show you how you can be part of this and keep these stories coming. They're all great. So we'll finally end things up here with Heather and Steve telling all of us on this program how we can get involved in keeping the Paul Smith legends alive. All right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul. Paul, you're on.
Very good, Mike. Thank you. And good to be with everybody out there. I wish I could see your faces. If anybody ever wanted to work a crowd by looking them square in the eye, it was Gould Hoyt, and I'm going to do my best. If I was given free rein to talk, I'd take the whole hour, but Mike wanted me to make this brief, so excuse me for following some notes here. Gould Hoyt, when I was asked to do this by Mike, and I don't know if it came from Mike or from Heather first, but once I was asked to talk about the life and times, as it were, of Gould Hoyt, I feel like I was preparing for this all my life, because everything that Gould did, said, wrote, it was like he was telling his story all through his life. And those of us who were around him, and I've been around him, was around him till he died for 44 years. I don't know if many remember this, but if you remember from his obituary, he would have been 100 years old this July 21st. So in a lot of ways, we're celebrating today and in the next little while, Gould's 100th birthday. He was born in Norwalk, Connecticut. He always talked about himself as a Connecticut Yankee, and I think I embraced what that meant, sort of a hard work ethic, New Englander, willing to handle cold winters and the like, and a steadfast person, and that he was. I have in front of me his personal profile that he wrote just after he left graduate school and was moving on to his professional career. Get this, he describes himself physically as 5'7", 145 pounds, wiry. Now, who would ever put that on a personal profile? I'll read you another thing. Written in 2011, when he was 79 years old. And the author who was interviewing him described Gould. Now, this is when Gould was 79 years old. Hoyt is short, stocky, and amazingly trim for 79. There's a fierce kindness to the man, a soundness of mind and body, and a little mischief too. I think that very much describes Gould, who he was when he started his career and who he was just, shortly before he passed on. In his profile, I learned so much, a lot that I knew that confirmed what I thought I knew, but also some new things. I knew in his graduate work, he studied forest management and specifically silviculture. But get this, now this is long before he even probably knew that Paul Smith College ever existed. But in his graduate courses, one of them was a history and philosophy of educational society. I love that. Another class in human relations. And of course, his forest history and policy classes. But he understood people, and he was brought up with a love and respect for education. When he was in school, I think it was a prelude to what he did at Paul Smith's. At Syracuse, and back then, that's all he called it. I went to Syracuse. Now, what that meant at the time, the New York State College of Forestry, which is now ESF, the College of Environmental Science and Forestry. But when he went to Syracuse, as he called it, he was a member of the Forestry Club. But not just a member, he was president of the club at one point. He was the social chairman. He organized the banquet, the yearly banquet, and also the yearly barbecue. So again, the way he was educated and the way he participated in his education was what he brought to Paul Smith College. From the day I met him, he was always talking about scouting. That was always a big part of his growing up life. The canoeing, the leather work, the camping, and all that went with it, including skiing, cycling, canoeing. And some of these events, like canoeing, he brought into woodsman's competition, especially for the big spring event. Once Gould left school, there was quite a gap there. He graduated high school at 18 years of age in 1939, went to Syracuse, but he didn't get his degree from Syracuse till 1947. Why? Because there was that period of World War II for him. And that was an experience in itself. He always taught, and I think the Army sent him to the right place. He got to see England, France, Holland, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. And he was always grateful as a forester that he was able to see these forests in Europe. And he was trained well. As part of that, even getting into the military, his scouting career was just as stellar as his college career, because he was always involved in the running of the scout troop, running camporees and that, and always with summer camping. And the summer camp, as he called it in scouting, again, that's what we called the summer program at Paul Smith's. He had a wide range of jobs even before he got his master's degree. For 5 summers, he worked for pay at a scout camp, not only as a counselor, but as a custodian. And Gould Hoyt was a type of person, even to his last days, if a job had to be done, whether it be cleaning toilets or raking up the front lawn, he was willing to do it. That was that humble part of him, that just because he was a professor emeritus, of which he was very proud, he was also humble enough to do the most menial of tasks, whatever they may be. So he had quite a job experience. Before he even left school, he was a forest fire firefighter in Oregon. Again, I always heard stories about that. He did bark beetle studies in the agricultural department. Then he came to New York and worked in the Huntington Forest. So he had that broad education of working both federal jobs, state jobs, private jobs. When he really got rolling with a job closer to home, he wound up at the Huntington Forest in New York State and started developing permanent silviculture plots. Now, again, this is long before he started working at Paul Smith College. So you can see the way he was brought up is the way he carried on that career. He didn't lose a stroke. He was born during the gay 90s. He grew up, if he graduated high school in 1939, he grew up most of those years during the Great Depression and knew about rationing, about saving, about having limited resources to do the job. And certainly he carried that on. One of his first jobs outside of a real forestry job was a lumberjack job. And he worked for a company and he was well prepared for it because he learned how to run a Maul chainsaw. Now, unless you're a chainsaw historian, you probably never even heard what a Maul chainsaw is, but that was a precursor to the Homolites and to the McCulloch chainsaws that we had at Paul Smith's. When he was a consulting forester in 1948, just as he got his master's degree, he started writing in one of his forester's field manuals, his professional notes. I have that little notebook, tiny little notebook, handwritten. I wouldn't say handwritten. The proper term is lettered by Gould Hoyt. That's a proper drafting term for it. And he just kind of gave me, after he passed away, in a sense, his whole working career, starting as a consulting forester. And very interestingly, in 1948, he started working at $60 a week for a consulting forester. Do the math quickly, that's $1.50 an hour. So that's puts it in perspective. He did his first internship with the New York State Conservation Department out of Albany. And his first job was, as he put it, a roving campsite inspector. So he had that aspect of it. He moved on to a farmer forester for a certain district. And also at the same time, now we're moving into 1949, 1951, as an acting manager for the Eastern Forestry Association. I remember Gould always talking about the big blowdown of 1950. So that would have been in the fall of 1950. And so his first job as a lumberjack was in 1951, working for Charlie Pease. And that was some of the toughest work that he could have been doing at that time, and learning techniques of how to deal with difficult timber. Because in a blowdown, you're not directionally falling these trees, and they're just going helter-skelter. So that was one of his first jobs. Shortly thereafter, in 1951, that's when he came to Saranac Lake. And I remember this well. He told me he was in Saranac Lake working for the New York State Board of Equalization and Assessment. So he was looking over forest lands and evaluating their worth so that local towns within the Adirondack Park could be reimbursed for taxes. And so he learned a lot right there. Now From $60 a week, he just jumped up to $100 a week. And he worked for them from 1951 to 1952. Now, I knew Dr. Buxton well enough, the man who literally built and kept Paul Smith College going in the early days. And I'm sure Dr. Buxton didn't put an ad in the paper looking for the unemployed who was looking for a job. He sought out Gould Hoyt and offered him his first teaching job. Now, remember back, he had already shown an interest in education with some of the classes he took voluntarily in his grad work. And so Dr. Buxton hired him, and Gould Hoyt went from $100 a week working for the state of New York to $95 a week working for Paul Smith College. There's my first indication of his dedication to Paul Smith College. And $5 a week, that was a big deal back then when you look at percentages. And so he took that cut in pay and worked for Paul Smith College. And it was in December 1952. If there's any question when he started, I have it right in his own writing. Now, when he started, he was taking over for an existing instructor. Back then, the semesters went right through Christmas. You took a Christmas break, you came back after Christmas, took 2 or 3 more weeks, and then your exams were towards the end of January. So he was walking into a classroom with an existing instructor for whatever reason, his name was Christensen, left Paul Smith's. You talk about Gould Hoyt and his show of confidence. He raised a kid raised a hand in the class. And when Gould started perhaps his first lecture, some student dared to say, Chris did it this way. And Gould Hoyt looked that student square in the eye and said, young man, Chris is gone. My name is Gould Hoyt. We're going to do it my way, Hoyt's way. And so from the day he started at Paul Smith College, there was no question about Gould Hoyt's confidence in what he was doing. He wasn't foolproof, but he was confident that he was going to make some very good educated decisions along the way. The first classes he taught, and Mike very much picked up on this when we talk about the Hoyt Peroni Memorial Forest, because when he first started, he was teaching everything from mechanical drawing, introduction to forestry, nursery practice, and that's where that comes in, the creation of the Hoyt Peroni Memorial Forest, along with silviculture and sugar bush production. I think still on the wall of our existing sugar bush, sugar house, there's an epitaph to Gould up there, and it talks about how many gallons of syrup were produced that particular year. And it covered way more than anything had been done in the past. There's nobody like Hoyt left anymore, I believe, at Paul Smith College, because he also used to teach saw filing. And I don't mean chainsaw filing, filing a bow saw and filing a crosscut saw along with Dean William Rutherford. Now, most of our saws, and Brett can speak to this, but I think most of our saws now, for competition at least, are sent out. What few saws we have left in the tool room, I wouldn't give you a nickel for them. They're dangerous, as well as any axe in that tool room right now. They're dangerous. I would not ask a student to take a swing with that other than use the back end of it to pound them all. But that's a little private commentary there. So Gould moves on. The first 12 years of his career, he went from $4,000 a year. By 1965, he was earning $8,100 a year. So in 10 years, he doubled his money. Not bad. They always say it's a good investment if you can double your money in 10 years. He was going to take a year off and do some traveling. In 1966, he got sick with pleurisy and he couldn't go west. But later on, he was able to take that trip. And I remember him leaving in his Chevy pickup with the camper on the back. He called it the old jitney wagon. And off he goes with his family and took quite a tour, always looking to meet former students. 1967, he was teaching intro in the fall. He had 2 lecture sections, all just him. He had 5 labs a week. And he also, excuse that phone call, these are the technical difficulties. He had 200 students all by himself. That's the year I came to Paul Smith College. So that year, 1967, in old Freer Science Hall. Many of you remember that. Mike Recklin certainly remembers old Freer Science Hall. That was where I took intro. If I got into my personal stories about him, we'll save that for another time. When we get to the Forestry Club cabin, 100 of us or more can gather and we can share those personal stories. By 1976, let's jump. Now, silviculture was a huge teaching issue. We had so many foresters. We had 338 students Gould had in 1976. He had 62 silviculture crews in 72 different locations all over Paul Smith's property. With crosscuts, bow saws, and maybe one of the 3 chainsaws Paul Smith owns at the time. It was awful. Now, this is the first time, though, or in recent years, that he wasn't teaching alone. He had Artie Miller, who had graduated in 1972, and he had me, Paul Pillis, class of 1969. By now, I had gotten my bachelor's degree from Syracuse. Again, it was while I was there in 1972 that they changed the name to ESF. And when I started teaching with Gould in 70, I had started teaching in 72, but by the time I was really working with Gould in 76, I already had my master's degree. And so the 3 of us were able to split up the responsibility. I can remember one afternoon with Gould, it was a Friday lab. We were down on the hill just below dorms 9 and 10, and we had 90 students in one of those labs, 90 students on snowshoes, bitter cold, and off we go. Unheard of right now. By 77, Gould was promoted to a full professor. And right after that, he was very proud to say he was able to take a sabbatical leave. And get this now, the very first sabbatical leave that Paul Smith had ever granted. So here he was a backwoods woodsman, a lumberjack, but in education, he gave education the credence and the side of the notoriety that professors needed a sabbatical. Sabbath comes from, we should be getting one every 7 years, excuse me. And Gould knew that. He knew the Bible well enough what sabbatical meant. And he was the very first. And since then, many, many others have gone on. By the time 1980 came along, he had done some traveling. About 3 years before 1980, he took a trip on his own accord around the country. He traveled, and he even has the mileage right here. He traveled 12,800 miles, and his mission was to visit as many of his former students as he could. So he initiated this whole thing, got permission, and called the sabbatical an alumni visit. And I think Heather would love to hear something like that said more and more. By 1980, by the way, he was making $22,000 a year. And you can see the grading of his pay didn't come along with some of these promotions like to a full professor very much. Now, by 1983, and certainly a lot of us remember this, that's the year that Gould chose to retire. And he puts down semi-retire. There's a couple things, and I might be speaking out of term, but you can't fire me. From the college, anything I do for the college now is voluntary. But I'm going to say this anyway. In my estimations, 2 reasons. Now, Gould was only, at this point, 62 years of age. He was eligible to retire, but physically, he was just as strong and ready to go as anybody. 2 things. The college was taking on more and more students that in Gould's estimations were not quite academically prepared for what he was teaching. We used to, in years past, have a summer entry program for those very same deficient students. Rather than start in September, they would start in July. There were only about 80 students on campus, and they would take only 3 classes if they were a forester. They took dendrology, they took algebra, and they took their first year of English. If they completed those in good order, they were assured a seat at Paul Smith College in September. But that gave those students that early hands-on with an instructor time to catch up to what Gould certainly believed was the right background to take his class. So in '83, he retired. He still held on to the Forestry Club and its activities and some other work. He then was allowed to go to France. And he went to France in 1983 after he retired. He went to Scandinavia in September of 1984. I asked him a question after he went to both of those places. Gould, how was the trip? All of a sudden, I saw that look on his face, that look of just frustration and anger. And so I asked him a simple question. How was your trip, Gould? He looks me square in the eye and said, damn it, Pillis, they should have sent me 25 years earlier, and I could have shared all this information with all those hundreds of students I've had since. That's the way he looked at it. But he was a working forester, and he just couldn't get away to have these educational trips before that. By 1985, he was relieved of his forestry club advisorship. He was also, and he was very dubious of this, the Woodsman's team went into the phys ed department, and he had his doubts about that, but so be it. By 1986, he was given the title Professor Emeritus, again, something he was very, very proud of. Along the way, though, there are many times when he was away from his wife, Ruth, always had a deep love and respect for his wife. And by his retirement, after that, in '86, he started doing things more with her. One of them was teaching some of the elder, what did they call it? Elder hostels on campus. And the 2 of them together like that. But the main thing they did in '68, or not '68, but in about 86, I think it was, they started working on the Paul Smith stagecoach. And that was, to Gould, one of the crowning glories of his time at Paul Smith's. He and Ruth could do it together, and they did pretty much their own personal fundraising for that. Nobody knows that coach better than Gould Hoyt. He knows every layer of paint that went on it. He knows every bolt, every shackle. And we'll see pictures coming up of that stagecoach in action. And one of his prouder moments was to have that coach ready in 1989 for the opening of the Paul Smith Visitors Interpretive Center. Have you seen that picture of Gould? Not of Gould, but of the stagecoach with some distinguished looking gentlemen sitting on it or getting on it. One of them is Governor Mario Cuomo, governor of New York State at the time, and he was there for the dedication of the Vic. And he got to ride from Paul Smith's campus to the Vic on the stagecoach that Gould and Ruth got going. By 1991, Gould had done enough with the stagecoach, and he had such a respect for it that he's the one who started and finally completed the construction in 1991 of that beautiful coach house right next to the gymnasium. And I remember him proud of putting that big plate glass window. And Gould, remember, when he was in the Army, he was in the Signal Corps, so he knew a little bit about electronics. And he wanted a light that would automatically turn on when anyone stepped up to that plate glass window so they could see the coach behind it. And hopefully today it's still working. On and on, Gould retired many times over, but finally in 1992, he retired from the Woodsman's team. And that was turned over to a member of the phys ed department, and that was Fred Thornley. I remember him well, and I hope Brett will speak a little bit on that, who the succession was from Gould to Fred Thornley, and now to, to the retiring Brett McLeod from the Woodsman's team, or hopefully just temporarily. Mike, I hope at some point you're going to talk to Mike about the Gould's trip to Nepal. Again, he would say, damn it, they should have sent me 35 years sooner so I could share those stories with students. By 97, Gould was instrumental in celebrating the 50th anniversary of a collegiate woodsman's competition at Paul Smith College. We had 10 schools and 31 teams show up, and it was just fantastic. 10 years before he died, one of the last entries, the final entry in his field book, was that in 2000, he was working on the old Boy Scout barn floor, but only working on it before he removed and unloaded all the junk out of the building. That's just the way he talked about it. Cleaned up the building, so here he is at that point, at age 80, doing that. Well, Gould Hoyt, I'll tell you, one of the best things I ever saw written about him was a series of quotes, really. He was interviewed by Adirondack Life magazine, and they did this article in October of 2001. You might want to look that up if you could. Very well done. A couple of highlights. Gould talked to the reporter, whose name was Peter Laurie. Gould talked about his time in the war, and he talked about those countries that he had been to. One thing Gould said was, I never got shot and I never had to shoot at anybody. He was pleased that he could do that, but he was also pleased, as I said previously, to be able to see the forests of Europe. So everywhere Gould went, he was never a victim of his circumstances. He embraced them, whether it be the Great Depression, whether it be World War II, whether it be changing from one job to another. He embraced that. He learned from it and shared it with his students. I remember hearing more and more stories about that time in World War II. There's another story that Gould recounted to this reporter about just Gould's teaching style. One thing was Gould was a tough grader, and Gould didn't give away grades. Gould figured if you learned pretty much the basics of the class, you got a C. For you to get a B, you had to know 80% of everything Gould wanted you to know about the subject. And what he said also, if you were to get an A was almost impossible. Not to learn everything he taught you, but what he wanted you to know about the subject matter. And even Gould said, to get an A in my class, you can't put enough time into my class to get an A. You don't even need an A, you need to be doing other things. So he encouraged people who had the potential to get an A, don't worry about an A. Get on the Woodsman's team and accept having a B in the class. I see a picture up right now, and I think in that very coach, and those are a couple of hired horses, bringing the governor over to the Vic. So that's the way Gould was with his grading, but also about safety. One thing, and I always can end I'm not going to quite end just yet, but one way Gould would always end a talk about Paul Smith College or his career in the forestry department is, we haven't lost a man yet. And he didn't mean lose somebody in the woods for an hour or two and we have to go look for him. He meant no one died in the woods on Gould Hoyt's watch. Now, some of that, of course, is luck, because that defied all insurance company statistics about how many deaths we should have had in the course of the hours that we put in the woods. But safety was of utmost. And I remember back in 1967, hair was a big issue. The hippies were just coming about and the guys wanted long hair. And Gould just wouldn't have it from a safety standpoint. And two students challenged him. And Gould Hoyt challenged them right back to the point where he threw them right out of his class permanently. Dr. Buxton backed him 100%. If Gould Hoyt, because Buxton trusted Hoyt's judgment, and so therefore he would back him. Now I'm sure with Dean Rutherford's blessing also. But by 1983, when I said one of the things that discouraged Gould was in intro, especially students that were not academically prepared. Now this Gould said to me personally, though, also, he no longer trusted that they really had, they meaning the administration. The administration had his back if something terrible happened, and that would be a death. And it could be an absolute accident, but those two things really weighed on Gould heavily. And that's why at age 62, he formally retired, I believe. That's what he shared with me. I'm going to end with some ideas that this reporter had about Gould after talking with him. It was supposed to be a 1-hour interview. I think it lasted over 4 hours. The interviewer says of Hoyt, he was a born teacher, but a tough grader. There were many who loved him, sure, as many of us, as many as we are on this video right now, and some who did not like him one bit. And so I think that sums it up about Gould Hoyt. He was not insignificant. He was either loved or don't want to quite say hated, but disliked, because he made a difference. One thing that Gould said about his career overall, he said, I don't know in my whole career that I've ever had to do anything that I didn't like to do. Do you follow me? And in this interview, almost every time he made a declarative statement, do you follow me? And he would throw in, well, whoever's name it was, Recklin, do you follow me? And he wanted to make sure he got his point across. The last comment that the interviewer said of Gould Hoyt, or a comment that he made about Hoyt, because Hoyt kept talking about his former students. And so the interviewer said, do you often see some of your former students? Gould said, hell yes, I do. I've been living in this house my whole career on the Keys Mills Road. They know where to find me. So they show up. And here's what Gould says. My former students know where to find me. And then they'll approach the house and say, Mr. Hoyt, do you remember me? And without a hesitation, Gould says, hell no, I don't remember you. How can I remember everyone? And then he says on the side to the interviewer, The guy has just put on 50 pounds. He has 4 kids tagging along behind him. He's got a beard full, a face full of beard, and he's half bald. How the hell do you expect me to remember him? I'm getting that way myself. And Gould was a good teacher. He was a good teacher because he passed on. He never held back. He was very generous with everything he knew, with all his experiences. And I think he set a pattern for what was to come. At the end of his life, he had some doubts about Paul Smith's College. And one was in 2000. In 2000, we were approaching, and I know I might step on some people's toes here, this idea of going to a 4-year institution. And he wasn't totally against it, but he was dubious. And he said to people, we have a niche, teaching forest technicians, and we do as good a job, well-renowned, all through the country and the world for that matter. And then he could list a whole long cadre of 4-year institutions that we were going to try to compete with. And he wasn't sure about that. Now, the history proves itself that we're still around, and we do have a bachelor's program, and it has shown successful. But he never wanted to lose what we already had that was working. And whether it be harness on a horse or a piece of machinery, if it's working, let's keep working with it. Let's stick with the known. And he was a confident man, and that led certainly came across in his teaching. There was one comment that you all have read, I'm sure. It's available, his obituary. But one of the best is to read in the Adirondack Daily Enterprise what Bob Seidenstein wrote about him in a very, very nice way. He talked about Gould Hoyt, and he talked about his ashes and how they were brought by stagecoach up to the church, St. John's in the Wilderness Church, by Gould's direction. He also talked about Gould and how well he knew how to handle an audience. And also the fact that when he handled an audience, Seidenstein said that if there was ever a loss of either words or confidence in Gould Hoyt, I never saw it in the 45 years he knew him. I've been blessed. I've been at Paul Smith's campus, college, one way or another for the last 54 years. And in some respects, I feel like I'm just beginning when I see all the 100 and so odd many people on this, this Zoom call right here. So I've said enough. I had to get that information out. Let's now get on with the fun stuff. And Karen, let's hear some good stories from you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen Klembock Frank. I graduated in '83. I have to just take this off because I'm not a Stumpy and it's driving me crazy. So I had to borrow it from my husband. I do respect Mr. Hoyt for all that. I never was a forester. And so that's what it's funny to me that I was called on to do this, but they've heard so many stories about me with my feelings for Mr. Hoyt and how I got through school. When I went to school for travel and tourism, started in '81 and graduated in '83. And I think all you students, all your former students now that we're all older, when we started school there, we didn't have classes to pick. Our schedule was made out for us. You might have had 2 empty spaces. We could pick electives, but they were also within a realm of things we could take. So I just went, got my schedule, and did all the things I had to do. And when my parents drove me there, my father said, "You're going to hate it here. You're going to hate it here. You're more of a girl by a city. I said, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm going to like it here." Meanwhile, I had already been accepted to a couple other schools for teaching. That was always my dream, to go into special ed and reading to teach. And my father kept saying, "You can't come home then. You're not coming home for a visit until you're halfway point for Christmas. You need to stay here. And if you do come home, I'm bringing you all the way back." I did go home And I got off the bus. My father had heard from a friend I was on my way home, met me at the bus station and got me in the car. And I said, Dad, you're going the wrong way. He goes, oh, no, I'm not. I told you if you came home before the break, you were going right back to school. And he brought me right back to school. So that next day, I was on the steps talking to some of my friends, my roommate, crying. And Mr. Hoyt walked out of the science building and he says, what are you crying for? I said, oh, I just hate it here. I said, and he goes, I'm going to say this. I said, just say what he said. He said, pick up your goddamn ass and follow me into my office. And I was like, oh my God, who would talk to someone like that? So I did. I followed him into his office. And he said, what are all the cheers for? And I said, I don't really belong here. I mean, I like it up here, but I don't belong here. I want to go home and start community college and then go on for teaching. He goes, oh no, Paul Smith used to be a 2-year school for forestry. And then we went on to ASF. You're going to look at this the same way. You're going to get a lot out of the school, no matter if this is.
Wayne, I'm muted.
I'm what? Whether this is your dream school or not, you're going to get 2 good years out of the school, 2 good educational years, and then you're going to carry everything you learned here onto your next school. And you'll be a great teacher from what you've learned here. From that day on, Mr. Hoyt became a really good friend. I call him my mentor because he took my schedule and looked at it and said, well, if you want to go on for education, you need a science class that's going to help you. You have no science here. I'm setting you up for biology with Dr. Kudish. I did not know Dr. Kudish at that time. And he goes, and I'm changing your math course. You're going to take a course with Collins, Mr. Collins. Did not know him either at that time. So I went from an all-girl Catholic school to Doc Kudish and Mr. Collins, and then other classes that I did enjoy, but those 2 were probably the hardest courses I ever took when I was at school there. And I was telling people last night when we were talking, I remember Doc Kudish for biology could be pouring out, whatever, and you're walking, trying to keep up with them was the best part, trying to keep up with them. And then you get to a bridge and you're laying down in mud. He makes everyone lay down, look under the bridge. I'm thinking, I did not sign up for this. I did not sign up for this. And I'd always go back to Mr. Hoyt and say, Mr. Hoyt, that class is not helping me. He goes, oh, it's helping me more, helping you more than you'll ever know. And he goes, I don't want to hear complaining. The school isn't here to change for you. You're here to change to what the school wants you to be. You'll always remember that when you're a teacher. We're not changing to help you. You're going to change to fit in and learn what you need to learn. I always remembered that. And I always took that with me, that he did that to help me out with that. As it went on, I remember him, and he says, and I'm signing you up for the forestry club. I want you involved in the forestry club, meet other people, get out of your comfort zone. And so he did do that. And then I had to go on the first meet that I remember going to. I don't know if the name is correct, but I think it was Beaver Creek or Beaver something meet. And I think it was outside of Syracuse. And my first embarrassment, because I had on Ked sneakers at the time, and he made me take my sneaks off and switch a pair of steel toe boots with someone who had an extra pair that were probably 3 sizes too big for me. He didn't care, but he didn't want those sneaks on me. And just had me do things around there, pick things up for that, the people that were competing and all that kind of thing. And I learned a lot from Mr. Hoyt. And then he became my friend. And I could never call him anything but Mr. Hoyt. To the day he passed away, I always called him Mr. Hoyt. And I always say, come on now, call me Gould. I said, I can't. You're always Mr. Hoyt to me. So that was something I learned from him. He goes, that's respectful. You're a respectful girl. And I always remember him saying that after he told me to get my goddamn ass off the ground. And he just was a great person to learn things from. And you could always go to him for help and talk to him about different things. And then he would see me once in a while. He goes, okay, your next assignment. I said, I don't have you for a class. He goes, I'm giving you an assignment. You need to learn how to throw a chain. And I'm going, what is that? He goes, ask another forester. Ask one of the foresters, and they'll tell you what it is, and they'll teach you how to do it. And I had told Kathy Gowan that, and she's laughing at that too, because that was probably one of the hardest things I had to learn to do without breaking my wrist. I've never done it. I haven't done it since then. He also was just a very I like some people, like you'll say, hated him or you loved him or you were in between and you got to know him. I remembered him from people complaining and bitching that they have to do their saws again, their axes again for the 10th time because it wasn't to his liking. They knew it was right, but it wasn't to his liking. But they'd never argue with him because if they did, they would be out of that class. I would see him on the steps of the science building before their class doing it and then coming back out because it wasn't accepted, doing it again and again and again. That's a good teacher. And I learned that years later when I was teaching in a classroom, not with axes or anything to that extent. I worked at a camp and he said, you'll love it up here. You'll never want to go home. I never did want to go home after I was there. I worked 2 summers doing the elder hostel program the year after I graduated. And then the year after that, I did it again. And Mr. Hoyt and his wife, Ruth, would always take groups of my people and talk to them about the history of the Adirondacks and teach them things they wanted to know or answer questions. It was just a great thing. You know where the canoes were under the old library? That was where Ruth's room was to teach the history or to show pictures and stuff, was down there when I was there. So they'd always go down there with her and she was great with that. He'd always call her the wife. I had to check with the wife and I say, Mr. Hoyt, she has a name. I said, what is Mrs. Hoyt's first name? The wife. That was his big thing with all of us, like trying to get a rile out of us. He would invite me over to his house with Ruth and to have tea and cookies. She would make tea and cookies to come and relax because you need a break. Come for some tea and cookies with the wife. And I would just shake my head and I'd go down there. And the same thing, he never wanted you really don't knock and yell your name. Just knock as you open the door. You're always welcome. And he always made you feel that way. I can remember he had a surgery, I think on his knee. He hurt his leg and he was supposed to be off of it. I was driving by one day to go back to camp and he was out by the soccer field cutting all the grass. And I stopped my car. I said, what are you doing? You're not supposed to be doing this right now. And, you know, his wonderful vocabulary, he goes, I have to get the horses some fresh grass. He was bringing it down there. So I got out of the car and helped him do that. And he says, now you can come down and see the horses with me. And that's an honor if he invites you down to see the horses. I learned that early on. And he just was, I just can't even describe such a good person. So there were quite a few years. He didn't work for me, but I hired him, had the guy who owned the camp hire him to do some runs to Quebec, to Montreal, to pick up campers from France. And I said, I don't think they speak any English, Mr. Hoyt. He goes, that's okay. We'll have a good old time coming home. Okay, so I met him the next day and I had interpreters at camp. And the kids would get in at like midnight. And so the interpreters would talk to them, and go back and forth for me. So the next day I was talking to them through an interpreter. And they said, this man talked for the hours it took to get back. We didn't understand one thing that he said, and he just kept talking and talking and talking. So I always laughed at that he did do that to make people feel welcome in their own, in any way that he could. He was just, you know, so he ended up doing those drives for me, and I kept more in touch with him after that. But there were a few years when I went on to school and then got my master's for teaching, was teaching in the city of Rochester, and lost touch with Mr. Hoyt. And I kept telling my husband, Pete, find out how Mr. Hoyt is. I just don't feel good about it. I haven't talked to him in quite a while. And Pete came home one day, he says, I got to tell you something. Part of it's good, part of it's not good. He goes, my dad passed away from bladder cancer a few years before I got in touch with Mr. Hoyt. So Pete came back and told me, he goes, no, he's still there in the same house, he said, but he has bladder cancer and he's not doing that great. I said, okay. I said, I'm going to call him. He goes, you're not going to call him just now. It was like 8 o'clock at night. I said, yes, I am. So I called his house and his son, Eddie, answered, and Eddie he goes, he'll remember you. He'll remember you. Give him a few minutes. So Mr. Hoyt got on the phone and we talked for quite a while. It was a couple of weeks before Christmas, I think. And I said to him, I said, Mr. Hoyt, there's one person I've always wanted to tell something to that I never did. And now being a teacher, I see how important it is, because you don't get pats on the back of when you're teaching. You don't get any of that. I said, I just want to tell you now, you were the best non-teacher I had to get me through school and push me on my way to be a teacher. And I want you to know I am a teacher. And I thank you very much for having me, keep making me stay, basically, at school and enjoy my years there and enjoy the following years there. You would see me all the time, help me out. I said, but you made such a difference in my life. And he started crying over the phone where he couldn't catch his breath. I said, Mr. Hoyt, are you okay? He goes, yes, I just need to tell you, you have made the day I haven't had in a couple of months, just to hear that from a fellow student that I've had here. And you say I never taught you, but I did teach you a lot. I had you at the forestry cabin. I taught you the biggest thing I taught you was telling you that you'll love this. You're going to learn a lot at this 2-year school and take it and move on with it and do the same for your students when you get to be a teacher, because you will become a teacher. And that was so true. And that was the best thing I think I ever did, was tell Mr. Hoyt, another teacher, that everything they did for me was appreciated, and I did what I wanted with my life with a lot of help from him. So I don't know if that makes sense to people, but I have a special place in my heart for Mr. Hoyt, for how tough he was with me and making me finish there, because he really did make me finish there. Because my father's first question was, well, who taught you? I said, a forestry professor. He goes, well, good for him. He goes, because you weren't coming home anyway. So it was just one of those things that I have a lot of love for Mr. Hoyt. He taught me a great deal of all different areas, and I learned how to throw a chain. So I just want people to know, I know people liked him and didn't like him, and other people have a great memories of what he did for them. And I'm to prove that as a travel and tourism person, that I learned a lot from him, more than I think some other professors in my whole career of teaching and everything I learned at Paul Smith's. But on top of it being a great school, he was a great professor. If you had him full time, I would think. I'm sure he was difficult, but I take a lot of what I learned from Mr. Hoyt and finishing there. So that's really, is not being a stumpy. That's all I want to say. So thank you. And then I think Kathy Gowan's going to talk now.
Hi, I'm Kathy Miller Gowan. I graduated in '86 as a forestry technician in recreation, and was really blessed to have Gould as our woodsman's coach and forestry club, not director, but supervisor. And at the time I was on the woodsman's team, and I was a public relations officer for the forestry club, and we had just come back from, I want to say, a meet in New Hampshire, and there were a ton of people in the forestry club cabin. At that time, the forestry club was very well known, very well attended, and Hoyt was going over how we had done individually and as teams at the meet. We had both men's and women's team had done quite well, and he's describing something, and I think, I want to say I had done an excellent time in Bosar or Crosscut or something, and he's describing, and he points kind of over in my direction, and he says, you know, Bun's over there. And I'm looking behind me to see who he's pointing to, and there's not anyone behind me, and everyone's looking really perplexed. And he goes, you know, pumpkin buns. And he points straight at me. And I'm, color is just flushing, and I'm trying to slide under the bench and die because I'm totally mortified. These are all my peers. And he just called me pumpkin buns out of the blue. And, the whole cabin erupts in laughter. And it's still to this day probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. But I wear that as a badge of pride, because I didn't realize that Hoyt didn't just give out nicknames to people. When I asked him after, where did you pull pumpkin buns out of? And he goes, well, my favorite color is orange. As though that would make perfect sense to anyone. So I still am not able to connect those dots as to how he got that. But thankfully, my college buddies never yelled, hey, pumpkin buns, across the quad. They were kind enough to just say, hey, PB. which is bearable. So that's my funny story for Gould Jennings Hoyt. And there's a lot more, but we're running short on time, and I want to turn it over to Mike Recklin again. And thank you guys so much for joining us, because this has been a hoot.
It sure has. And I presume I can be heard. Kathy, am I good there? All right. We'll keep this short, but I just wanted to take people back to the 60s when I arrived at Paul Smith College. And I met Mr. Hoyt, never ever Gould, in the fall of 1964, my freshman year as a terminal forester at Paul Smith. Some people think terminal forester is a disease, but it's not. It was really a program that we were in. We'd seen Hoyt around campus. He was a bow-legged little guy with a voice loud enough to blow down walls. Always with green wool pants, always with a plaid shirt, suspenders, and chewing on the end of a cigar, which I'd never really seen lit. He's racing around, and oh yeah, he always wore a pair of steel-toed boots everywhere he went. Hoyt was rough, tough, gruff, and demanding, as you've heard from these other folks. Most of the freshman forestry class was scared to death of this guy. So it was after Thanksgiving, introduction to forestry class. Up till Thanksgiving, we had Jack Backles for our teacher. And after Thanksgiving vacation, we knew that Hoyt was coming our way. And we're a little apprehensive, okay? We're all sitting in the auditorium of the old classroom building. And just to let you know, in those days, Paul Smith was not really known for its creativity. If they built a new classroom building, the other one became the old classroom building. When you came up to college and you were assigned to a dorm, it could be dorm 1, 2, 3, or 4, unless maybe you were assigned to dorm 5 or 6. Okay? Kept things simple. There were some dorms that had names, but they were more in the line of descriptors than names. I spent my first year in Loomis Castle and my second in the plantation. I had friends who lived in the snake pit, okay? And then they didn't call it the snake pit because it evoked pleasant Adirondack images. They called the place the snake pit because it was a snake pit. Now, not only were the dorms have character, but back those days, the people living in them had character too. Kathy talked about her nicknames. So I checked into Loomis Castle my freshman year here, and first person introduces himself to me is Jim Straub. He says, you can just call me King James. Fair enough. If I'm going to live in a castle, guess there's got to be a king. Next year, I moved to the plantation. There was no king, but the guy next door to me was Mick Mickelin, the self-proclaimed prince of the plantation. Across the hall was Squeaks. Next to that, Squeaks was cousin Brucey. Down the hall lived the mole, and the mole lived with the walrus, okay? And downstairs lived the bear. We were often visited by a guy, didn't live with us, called the White Rat. So welcome to college, kid. You've been assigned a room in a zoo. That's the way the place was. Anyhow, that was the college. Back to Hoyt. So there we were after Thanksgiving in the old classroom building, waiting for Mr. Hoyt for his first time to address the class. In storms Hoyt, carrying a mountain of books under his arm. He marches up to the front of the class, slams the books on the podium, spins around and surveys the class in front of him. Still chewing on that cigar, he bellows, "Gentlemen," there were no ladies in forestry back then. It was gentlemen. He says, "Gentlemen, there's one thing you're not going to have to worry about in this class, and that's the snow melting off your boots." Okay. And he was right. We didn't have to worry about that at all. You see, Paul Smith was really a leader in energy conservation. Back then, they figured with all those forester bodies in the room, there was no need to waste money on heat. Okay. If someone fell asleep during class and just froze, well, that probably was not much of a loss anyhow. You see, as Paul said, it all came down to philosophy, and Hoyt would tell you that. Back to philosophy. And in the 60s, Paul Smith had plenty of philosophy. So towards the end of that semester, there's this exam. Some of you remember it. Mick remembers it, I'm sure, and he's on this call. It was on the 480A, the 1926 Fisher Forest tax law. And it had a reputation around campus for being a killer of a test. You've already heard that Hoyt was not one to give out grades. I studied harder than I had ever done in my life for that test. Now, mind you, I might not have studied very hard for anything up till that point, okay? When I came to do my admissions interview at Paul Smith's, I remember it well, so the last thing the admissions director said was, "You can come and go to school here on one condition." I said, "So what's that?" He said, "You got to graduate from high school." I said, well, I took that on kind of as a challenge and actually did graduate from high school. See, I didn't really like school at that point. This whole college idea was my mother's idea. The reason I chose Paul Smith's because I could get smart in 2 years instead of 4, which I figure was twice as good. Okay. Anyhow, taking up that challenge, I did graduate from high school, packed my bags, headed to Paul Smith's with a solid C- high school average. The week after the exam, Hoyt gets up there and he's handing back these tests. And I got mine, and there it was, a grade of 74, a C-, just where I'd always been. Studied my butt off for that thing, and a C-. Some things never change. When he finished handing out those tests, Hoyt strode up to the podium, surveyed the class in front of them, and announced, to the whole class, mind you, Recklin got a 74 on this test. Looking down, I thought, good grief, or maybe something a little stronger. Humiliation in front of the whole class. He paused a minute for this statement, 74, to sink in, and he said to the whole class, and he said, "And that's the highest grade in this class." I was stunned. I remember that moment so distinctly that 55 plus years later, I can tell you where I was sitting in the auditorium and how much snow had not melted off my boots. Sure, that was a C- grade, but it was the top of the class C- grade. He made that announcement on an absolutely brutal exam because a C- cut it with Hoyt. And then in those days at Paul Smith's, you know that if you cut it with Hoyt, you cut it, okay? You were there. So I got out of my 2 years with Paul Smith's, then went on for a few more at the University of Michigan, on to SUNY ESF, used to be the forestry school. By then I liked school. My mother didn't make me do it anymore. I eventually traded classes in the classroom and filled up a career of teaching college, many of it back at Paul Smith's. Many of it, you know, a colleague of Paul's and Jack Skelly, who's also on this call, which is great, good folk. Each new term, when a class was settling in, I'd stand up in front of my class and I'd survey that class. I'd look for a C- kid in that class, usually one like I was, sitting near the back, kind of shy, trying not to be noticed. And I'd think of that day in the old classroom building, and I'd say to myself, can I push this kid hard enough to be on the top of his class? And that's kind of a philosophy that I took with me throughout my teaching career. It was a seminal moment and one that stuck with me through the ages. From a great professor who was tough, rough, demanding, but also when you cut it with Hoyt, you knew you cut it. So that's my story. I'm going to turn things over to Brett. Brett's going to tell us about how things are at the college and how the legacy lives on.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. It's been fun to hear the stories and also to watch the chat. And I guess sort of the one thing I've been struck by is how much hasn't changed, how many of the lessons are the same, and in reflecting a little bit on my path through Paul Smith's, I'm really proud of some of the things that we've been able to maintain, sort of both in the spirit of Hoyt and the sort of the overall meaning of Paul Smith's. I oftentimes tell people that our goal here at Paul Smith as professors is for our students to leave after 2 years or 4 years or however long they're here with calloused hands and sharp minds. And some of the things that we're doing here that I think might resonate with folks from their time here. You'll be glad to know, for example, that one of the things that we consider part of the curriculum is teaching a work ethic still. So we still go out no matter what the weather is. While the students have changed some, we haven't let up on giving them the field time and the experience with the black flies. In fact, right now I'm obviously in my office, and I've still got class tonight as we've got master's students here. We've got 21 of them, and we were in the field 10 hours yesterday collecting their field data and all the rest. And it's kind of a neat combination because we still have them out there. They all did their pacing exercises to learn their pace and all the rest. But we're also at the same time, we're using remote sensing and LiDAR data to inventory forests. And so it's this really fun combination of both old time skills and new technology that have blended together in a pretty meaningful way. And so when the GPS units break down, we pull out our compasses and we still navigate to wherever we go. We don't head back to the truck and call it quits or anything like that. Some of the other things that are going on around campus that I thought folks might identify with a little bit and appreciate is we've moved all of our forest management. It had been outsourced for, I don't know, 15 years or so. We've moved it all back into the college, and we have a student micro enterprise crew that was started way back under Mike Recklin that's expanded, and we'll be launching a second crew, and they do all the harvesting, the development of the forest management plan, and the inventory. And so we're pretty happy with that. And then we're also expanding it this next year to a cabin and trails crew that will be doing sort of the recreational management of the property too at the Vic. So that's pretty exciting for us. The Woodsman's team still continues to go strong. This is actually, I coached the Woodsman's team for 16 years. Gould Hoyt came up and visited the cabin quite a bit when I was coach, and was always, he gifted several axes to the team from his personal collection, and was always interested in hearing about how things had changed. And while he was resistant to some of the technique changes and all the rest, I'd always bring him the score sheet with the times and sort of say, when was the last time you saw the 9-second chop and all the rest. So we had a lot of fun with it. And I'll actually be stepping down as head coach for the Woodsman's team. It was one of these things when I stepped up to be the department chair, I said, at some point, something has to give. And so my assistant coach, Keith Braun, has come a long ways and is more than capable and ready to take over the team. So he'll be doing that this fall, and I'll probably still stay on as the advisor to the Forestry Club. And of course, if they need anything, I'm never far away. We've did some maintenance over the summer at the Forestry Club cabin. So we put in a new sill log that had rotted out, and we're still always trying to take care of that. And we've expanded the arena even more down below the new Lumberjack Sports Arena that will be named after Gould. Last year I published a book, American Axe, and in that book, if folks have had a chance to look through it, you'll notice that some of the axes are actually from Gould Hoyt's personal collection, and were lent to me by Eddie Hoyt. So pretty neat to be able to carry on that little bit of history there. So I guess the other big thing is that if you haven't been to campus in a couple of years, we have a new team of draft horses, Dana and Dodge, and they are halflingers, so they're a little smaller, but our feed bill has dropped by 30%, so that's a good thing. And they are pretty good at weaving their way through the woods and skidding logs and plowing the garden and all the rest. So those things have all stayed the same here at Paul Smith, and pretty happy that we've been able to continue so many of these traditions. So Steve.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm probably the only guy in this call who has never had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Hoyt. I'm the Vice President for Development and Alumni here at Paul Smith College. Been here 16 months, and I'm learning so much about this fabulous little college. And I just love meeting all of you Smitties and hearing these fantastic stories. And I'm trying to watch the chat and seeing what everybody's working on. So it's pretty fantastic to watch what's going on. A lot of you probably heard that there was a project started actually way back in 1957, 58. There was a tree planting down at Lake Clear. I believe it was a fire had burned over, and members of that class helped to replant it. And now it's a beautiful forest. I know Brett's had his students down there as a capstone project working on what's going to be called the Hoyt Peroni Memorial Forest. It's going to have beautiful walking trails, interpretive signage, picnic area. It's going to be, when it's done, a fantastic project. We're trying to be able to recognize this wonderful man, to dedicate the Hoyt and Gould Hoyt and George Peroni Forest. It's going to take a little bit of dollars to finish the project, and we put out recently an appeal to all the forestry alumni. And I'm very pleased tonight, hot off the press, I got a report back that we've had 55 alumni step up, and our goal is to raise $15,000 for the forest. We are at $9,265. So Mike Recklin, that took a big jump in just the last 4 days. And I want to thank everybody for helping us to try to get this project up and running, so that next year at reunion we can go up and actually do the dedication and install the signage. The other thing I learned is the beautiful Woodsman's Arena, where all the action's taking place, there's a goal there to ultimately name that the Gould Jennings Hoyt Memorial Woodsman's Arena. There's a target on there of trying to raise $100,000 for that naming opportunity. We're currently right around 16,000 towards that. So we're trying to continue to raise money so we can make that dedication hopefully next year as well. How wonderful would it be to have a dual dedication, to unveil the signage at both the forest and also at the Woodsman's Arena. So I'm just pleased to be here. I've learned so much tonight about this wonderful man that I never had the pleasure of meeting, but it just matches so perfectly with the history of Paul Smith College. At this point, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, who probably needs no introduction, but that's my colleague, Heather Tuttle.
And I forgot how to unmute myself. That was perfect timing. So in case you don't know, reunion's coming up real soon. In just 29 days. You should have a brochure at home, looks like this. If you didn't get one, call me, I'll send you one. Information's also on our website. But the main reason why I'm pointing that out is during reunion this year on Sunday, and I have to be honest, I'm looking for the schedule in the reunion brochure to be sure I have the right time. Yes, at noon on Sunday, Mike Recklin is going to offer a little talk out at the Hoyt Peroni Memorial Forest and Picnic Area. It's not officially dedicated yet, but he's going to talk to you more about it there. We're hoping next year, when we're able to dedicate the forest lands appropriately, that we'll bring you out there once again. Other things I can tell you about, of course, Steve touched on all the fundraising things. I have to say how amazed I am at how many people have been so generous. And when I see the different class years, I'm like, these two men meant so much to so many alums. I did know Professor Hoyt a little. He didn't know my name. Always felt bad for it. He would forget my name. And I tell him all the time, I'm in Hotelli. It's okay. It's okay. But he brought me the most beautiful flowers. Anyway, I did not know Mr. Peroni, and I'm sad for that because I've heard so much about him. So Smitty story hours like this are helping me learn who they were, even though I'm not in their classroom. Stories that you all have shared tonight. Karen knows I'm a big softie anyway, but when she tells me the story about her sitting on those stairs, I just can't take it. I start to cry every single time, because I think we've all had that moment, maybe not with Mr. Hoyt, but at some point in our life where we're ready to give up and somebody thankfully reaches out. And how grateful I am that there's teachers in the world like that. But all of that aside, please do consider coming to reunion this year so we can be together again, which is sort of our running theme this year, because we're just so excited to be together with anybody again, right? And who better to be with than your Smitty family? So I see the chat is blowing up here. Let's see. Yeah, Mom, Pop, Peroni, another great couple. I really, gosh, I have regrets. I didn't know them. Let's see, and there were some questions. I know that Brett answered the questions about the horses. Check the date of the start of planting at Lake Clear. I think the first trees were planted in 1950. Is that true? Mike Recklin, can you answer to that, or Brett?
I have been told 56, 57, but that very well could be.
Okay.
Well, I know that there had been previous plantings that were unsuccessful, and that this planting was, they actually pitted the site, 1 foot by 1 foot pits, 1 foot deep, and prepared the soil for the trees. So I don't know if that 50 was an unsuccessful planting or if the actual project started back then. I don't know.
We just had someone from the class of 52 say that he was there in 52. Well, I don't know if it's class of 52, but he was there in 52 and planted some. How large is the forest?
I do not know. Right now I just don't have the figure in my head. It is a known. We've got a map of it. It extends beyond the Lake Clear School, around the back of the school, and it extends. The area planted also is over on the other side of the road. So it was quite an extensive plantation, and students worked on it from then on out. I was there in the 60s and we did pruning. There was a scleroderus outbreak in the Adirondacks, Jones disease. We pruned the lower branches, removing those to stop the disease from getting in the trees, which was successful. It's a well-stocked plantation right now.
It's about 40 acres that we've worked into the forest proper there with a trail system.
Thank you. Other questions? Someone else asked how many people were online. I think Mick may have asked that. At one point we had 107 tuning in tonight, including us. A couple of signed off since. We did run a little bit over, but I think it's okay. I think this is what happens when Smitties get together and start sharing stories. Let's see. I'm not seeing any other questions. Is there anything else that we would like to share with the group tonight? What are we thinking, folks? Dr. Recklin.
It's been so good to see these names flashing on my screen from history, okay? And it's been so fun to see all those names as people have said, oh yeah, I know that guy, and I worked with this guy, and so it's really been fun. I look forward to seeing you all at the memorial, either this alumni weekend or next year when we anticipate dedicating the site.
Excellent. Wait. Jack Skelly wants me to turn on his mic. Professors, do I dare?
Oh, you had better.
Okay, let me see if I can do that. Bear with me. I'm not used to doing this part. Let's see. I know it can't be too difficult. Oh, there's his name. Allow to speak. Here we go. Jack, I think you're live.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And I enjoyed this to the nth degree, and I knew Gould and of course Professor Peroni quite well. In fact, I was honored when Professor Peroni passed that he asked me in his will to be one of his pallbearers. So I was quite honored with that. And as some of you may remember, he was second wave Normandy, 82nd Airborne. So he had quite a career in the Army. Anyway, here's my Gould story. And Bob Seidenstein called me just before Gould passed, and he said, you know, Gould is in pretty bad shape up at Will Rogers, which some of you may remember, it was right across from the Ames Plaza. And so I called Gould and I said, Gould, do you remember me, Jack Skelly? And he said, of course I remember you. God damn it. You know, that was typically Gould. And he said, you know, he says, I remember you as a student. You had Lanphier Scotch Pine plot number 9 at the Boy Scout camp. And you had a Scotch Pine plot and you did a seed tree removal on a seed tree that was done in the previous plot. And he remembered from 1971 where that plot was, what the plot name was, and the crew that I had. I was the crew chief, and the crew that I had that we did all of that work. And that was my Gould story. And I was floored that he remembered all of that from 1971. And later, Bob Seidenstein told me that he had passed away. And of course, I was deeply saddened. I have his obituary, and I think I shared that with Heather. And he was quite the gentleman. And so that was my Gould story, and I appreciate you unmuting my mic.
Absolutely.
Hey,
Thank you
Jack,
so much.
I just want to say that we're going to do one of these on George Peroni, and I want to talk to you about that.
I have quite a PG Smith and I have been in contact with each other in the last year. Some of you might remember Greg Smith.
Yeah,
we just called him PG. And in fact, we just chatted recently, and he was the one that told me about this, you know, the Zoom call for Gould, and of course I applied. I sent Heather an email and said I'd like to join this. I'd like to, you know, I'd like to you know, listen to what the folks had to say about it, and. He also mentioned the business of the poor. And by the way, I just got today in the mail the announcement, or the brochure, if you will, on the Hoyt Peroni Memorial Forest. And Paul and I have been texting about it. Paul and I worked together in introduction to forestry in the late 70s through the early 80s. And then we taught forest recreation 222 together in the summer camp. So I know Paul pretty well. And so the bottom line is that I just got that today. But I sent to PG Smith sort of a history of George Peroni, because he said that he really didn't know George all that well, even though he was on the faculty. So I'll send that to Heather as to what I wrote as sort of a bullet points, if you will, about George Peroni, who was quite the gentleman, and nicknamed during summer camp in 1971, surveying 222, because I started as a technician and ended up as a pre-pro. And in 1971, met my wife on a blind date during that summer camp, and George found out about it, and he made quite a deal over it. He found out that she was from Lake Placid, and he nicknamed her Rose. And of course, 50 years later, this month, my wife and I, well, now married, and we're married 43 years, or is it 44? She'll kill me, but anyway, the bottom line is we've been married a long time. Anyway, thanks so much for unmuting my mic, and I appreciate it. And I will send to Heather the little blurb that I wrote about George Peroni that I sent to PG Smith. Thanks so much. I enjoyed this immensely. And Mike, good to
Thank you.
see you.
Hey, good to hear from you, Jack.
Keith Balla would like a moment to speak. For those who are not aware, Keith Balla is nephew to Gould Hoyt. And he's joining us. He's one of, I think, only 2 non-alumni on this call. So Keith, I've unmuted you. You should be able to speak now.
Hello, Tess. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
I got about 4 stories. I'm only going to pick one.
Thank you.
Uncle Gould was famous in the family for his day-long trips. He would leave first thing in the morning, hit Brookfield, go over to Westport to visit his other sister, and head back up north. Well, one time he came down, Mom and Dad were busy doing something, so Uncle Gould said, well, show me the forest you got across the street. It's about maybe 15 acres, I think. I'm not sure. So I said, why? It's just trees and woods. He goes, well, I want to see. So him and I go walking over there. We're walking around. This big old pine tree came down years back. It was about half rotted out. He starts kicking it. Finds a big, huge grub in the middle. And he goes, oh, look at this grub. I looked at it and said, yeah, it could make good catfish bait. And he goes, no, this is going to taste good. Twisted off the head and ate it. And said, do you want to bite before I finish this off? I said, no. He goes, it's a shame. It's kind of piney tasting. I have never forgot that, but I've never eaten a grub, though. He could survive. Thank you.
Try that again. Thank you, Keith. I muted myself. I think, thank you. I might have nightmares now about that grub. Paul, Karen, Steve, anything more to add to our evening? It looks as though we may have lost. Oh, there's Mike. He came back. Oh, I thought he was gone.
Still here.
This has been a lot of fun, everybody. Thank you.
This
Yeah.
has been great.
Yeah. And we'll do it again, honoring another legend of Paul Smith's,
Absolutely.
George Peroni.
Again, thank you all of our presenters this evening. Dr. Brett McLeod had to leave us a moment or two early. He's got to prep for a class. Kathy Gowan had something she needed to attend to immediately and had to step off, but thanks to both of them. Also, thank you to Mike and Paul for leading this great journey, and Karen, and of course, Kathy for both sharing some of their personal stories. I've never heard the PB story. That one was good for me. I knew what PB stood for, but I never heard the story, which was great. And let's see. Thanks again to everyone for joining us. We've recorded this session. If you want to look back on it again, you'll be able to. It'll be up online very soon. I'd like to say as soon as tomorrow, but reunion's 29 days away. So we'll see. Maybe I'll have it up before reunion. What do you think? We'll try.
Good enough.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm trying to check the chat here. I don't see any more questions coming in, but I so appreciate everyone joining us. Not a forestry major, but love the stories. Absolutely. That's right, Andrea Armston. Hoteliers love this stuff too.
That's great.
Carl Mall, Steve, we'll see you Saturday at the PA Smitty's picnic.
After I paint my hard hat red, I have a couple orange ones at home. I grabbed my telephone company hard hat that I did a little work with. So I don't want to look like the south end of a northbound deer. So, so thank you for the recommendation.
I think the only reason why I get to wear this white one is because it says Paul Smith's on it, and I would never wear it in the forest. That would never do. EE tears too, that's right. Smitty on all. Yes, John. I'm trying to go back. They keep jumping so quick, these comments. This
They
has
are,
been
there's so
wonderful.
many on, yeah.
It's amazing. And even though we went over, it's just, it went fast. It went really fast, don't you think?
It went so quickly, and there's so many more stories we can say just about Hoyt, but we could do that at the memorials, at the service that we're having at the, when we put it in place.
When it's dedicated.
Yes, thank you,
Yes.
Heather.
I knew what you meant.
I know, but 500 people, others don't.
And I have Brett's book here in case no one knew about it. I mean, I know he mentioned it, but Dr. McLeod, there's some amazing stuff in here. And I'm a hotelie. What do I know about axes? But I'm learning. And the photos are amazing.
I was just gonna say that cover is great.
Absolutely. You can't do it justice, with the video and everything, but just some of
Oh,
the
that's really
photos
good.
in here are just amazing. Anyway,
Nice. Well, thank you very much, Heather, and everyone else that did this. It was great hearing from everyone.
this was great. This was really great. Mike Recklin's taking calls. All right, we still got a few left on here. Trying to now, Steve and Heather, go paint your heart. Okay.
Anybody wants to go back and listen to the Smitty Story Hour that Brett did, you can find it on the website,
Absolutely.
along with all of our, if you have an idea for a future Smitty Story Hour next year, send Heather an email and we'll see if we can't make it happen.
If you could possibly send that email sometime after July
After Rio.
25th, that would be great. Otherwise, it might get buried for a little while. Thanks to all for this hour. I think we're gonna have to throw hour in quotes because, we might have went a little over. Oh, Paul's chuckling. This can't be good. Roland Page, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I did see Amy Harridan was on tonight. And one of our master's students is actually her son. He just graduated with his 4-year degree in May. And he's back now for the master's program, which is amazing. It's really great. Oh, and there's Amy's name now. Hi, Amy. Is Jay home? Was he able to watch too? Thanks, Pam. Steve will see you Saturday as well.
Somebody book some good weather for Saturday for the PA Smitty's picnic at Ricketts Glen. So it should be a good,
Yeah,
Yeah, it looks
Wonderful event.
beautiful.
Jay's sleeping, has to work tonight. Okay, what's happening Saturday? Saturday, the Pennsylvania, I can't even talk, the Pennsylvania chapter of Paul Smith College Smitty's is hosting their 5th annual picnic. The 5th annual was supposed to happen last year and was postponed twice for reasons we don't need to go into. And it's happening this weekend, actually this Saturday, which is great. It's in Ricketts Glen. If you're interested in attending, give the alumni office a call tomorrow morning at 518-327-6253, and we can get you signed up. I think the meal is $15. It's a picnic lunch, either steak or chicken. I believe it's $15 a person. And then I think you're asked to bring a dish to share if you're able to. Sort of a potluck picnic. They'll have a silent auction and it's a beautiful location. Unfortunately, I won't be attending, but Steve will be there, as will a few other Smitties you may know. Jim Voorhees, who was on the call earlier. I don't know if he's still here. Pam Nobles will be there. Of course, Carl Ma, we mentioned earlier, is going to be there. I'm looking over the list of people who are still here. Hi, Mark Caulfield. I don't think you're going to the PA Smitty's event, but I saw your name. Didn't notice it before. Hi, hope everything's well. Frank Whitson, hope everything's great in Florida. Was at the fire department the other day doing my volunteer work, and your name came up. We wondered how you were doing. All right, folks. We've got 32 still with us.
Want me to tell you another story? This is Jack Skelly.
Sure,
Okay.
go for it, Jack.
I had Professor Hoyt for 3 classes while I was a student at Paul Smith's: Introduction to Forestry, Silviculture, and Forest Mensuration 222 in the summer camp. And he was a tough grader, as was stated many, many times tonight. And the first quiz that he gave us was a map of the United States. And he said, I want you to, delineate all of the states. And I was able to do all 50 states, or all 48 states, because Hawaii and Alaska weren't on the map. And I had enough time that I started to fill in the capitals too of the states. And when I got my test back, he took off points because I didn't include Hawaii or Alaska. And when I went up to him about it, he said, if you did all of this, you should have known that I could have put those on there, and you should have filled that out yourself, even though it wasn't on the quiz. And I said, okay. So right then and there, I kind of figured out the business of Mr. Hoyt. And later on in Mensuration 222 in the summer camp, we had the traverse to do with staff compass and 2-chain tape with a trailer, and also with ABNY levels. And when I was a senior at North Carolina State in the forest management program, I had a final exam. It was an oral final exam in a forest management course. And the question I got was, explain the use of an ABNY level. So I said, well, what scale do you want me to talk about? Topographic, percent, or degrees? And one of the professors knew that I was a Smitty. And he said, yeah, you Smitty guys know all about ABNY levels. I know that for a fact. And he said, let me guess, you had Gould Hoyt for one of your instructors. And I said, yes, sir, I certainly did. So I was able to delineate. I went up to the board and I drew a picture of an ABNY level and explained its use and how the mirror worked and how to read the scales and how to calibrate it. And they told me, sit down. And I said, yes, sir, I'm sitting down now. So that was another couple of stories.
Excellent.
Great.
That's great. I have trouble when I go through his photos. I have so many photographs. When he passed away, and folks sending these photos, there's so many people, and I wish I could identify them all. So when I look at the ones that are just Hoyt and a horse, I'm thinking, perfect, I know who's in this picture. And then you all know who the horse is too. And I'm just like, how am I supposed to remember that? Midnight I've got, I think I know which one was Midnight from all the photos I've seen. And people say, oh, well, there's Midnight. And was it Queenie with Midnight, Paul? Oh, Kathy.
I can't remember that
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, I feel better.
The big draft horse was Leo, and then the other two were Midnight, and I believe, oh gosh, I can't come up with the third one's name. But it was Leo was the big draft horse. He was a Belgian, and then there was a
Lady.
Percheron.
Well, Lady and Faye, yeah.
I can't remember the third one, but it was Midnight, and that was the young one, and then Leo was the old one. And
Where'd Queenie come in?
Queenie, there you go. There's Queenie.
Yeah. No, and the photos I put together tonight, I couldn't put them in any kind of order because
You all right?
you just can't. Are you there, Keith?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, I just heard you pipe up.
Sorry, I missed the question.
Oh, we're just trying to name horses, Queenie and Belle.
I don't know. I only know of Leo. Just
Uh,
because Jane, Ed, and I used to feed him carrots after dinner.
So Douglas Carrier said Lady. Lucy Hussman says Queenie and Belle. And then, you know, we had Lady and Faye, of course. They're retired now, living the life. Dana and Dodge are beautiful, but you know, all horses intimidate me because I've not been around them. But when they first arrived, I'm like, they're so small. They're still big, but they're so small in comparison to what we were used to. You know, having our draft horses, you know, Lady and Faye, they were just really big animals. And like I said, I was always intimidated by them. Whoever was in charge of the horses, they had my full attention. What do you want me to do? You want me to go where? I'm doing it, because I don't want to be the reason that the horses get out of control. And of course that never happens. Well, I shouldn't say never, but it never happened in my presence. Imagine it could happen. All right, folks, I think we have done it. We're down to 26, and I think if we keep chatting here, they'll stay right on with us. And I gotta be honest, the boss wants me back for 8 a.m. and turning into a pumpkin real quick.
Well, thank you, Heather. This is well done on your part, putting the technology together.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but thank you. This wouldn't happen without your stories to share. People would get really bored hearing me tell stories about Professor Hoyt. I do miss his flowers. He would just come from his garden and he'd just pick flowers and bring them into all the offices, just because. Just such a nice man. He really was. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great
Thanks,
night.
Steve.
Take care. Nice job, Paul.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Karen.
Hi, Steve.
Thanks to all.
Thanks, Paul. Bye, you guys.